Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to another episode of UXR Conversations, the random YouTube show that I started in April of 2020 when a global pandemic hit and things got crazy. The goal of UXR Conversations is just to have casual conversations about a particular theme or topic with researchers and research leaders in the industry to learn more about what's going on in their world, to chat about research and various topics that are kind of just top of mind for us in the community. Um, we are about to be joined by Victoria, who will be joining in a few minutes. Until she does, just wanted to clarify why we're talking about the theme we're talking about today. So the theme, I called it leveling up. And my thought there was that there are so many options right now, so just countless options when it comes to learning and growing, both as a researcher and a research manager. And honestly, it's getting a little bit confusing. Whether you are early career and just trying to break into UX research and you're wondering what you should be doing, maybe you're in grad school, what's the best way to learn about UX research? Or maybe you've had a long career and you're trying to transition into UX research and you're not quite sure what's the best way to make up for the bits and pieces of knowledge you feel like you don't have. Or maybe you're in a situation where you are a manager and you're trying to grow as a leader and as a manager, and you appreciate the complexity of management and managing UX researchers, and you're not quite sure where to get started. So that's where the idea came from. And, in case you're not aware of this, there are just so many ways to learn right now. I know that I'm part of a bunch of research communities on Slack and elsewhere. I'm part of a bunch of different platforms for learning, my favorite being UXR Collective's platform, where I've spoken and done some conversations as well. We have podcasts, which I'm sure you have your UX research favorites. We have a bunch of different boot camps. We have an endless list of books. We have online trainings on like a dozen different platforms, from Coursera and through more dedicated platforms like DataCamp, if data is your thing and more on the quant side. It's an incredibly long list, and a bunch of questions come up around, well, what should I be doing? How should I be learning? What should I be focusing on in order to grow in my career? And another really interesting tidbit of information, I think, is that most of us, most of you, me, we don't actually use our learning and development budgets, which many of us are fortunate enough to have. So I think just based on a casual poll, I think I discovered that about 80 to 90% of tech workers and UX researchers in particular have access to some sort of learning and development budget, which can often be $1,000 a year or $2,000 a year. And yet most people don't seem to be spending even half of their budget, which is terrible, and disappointing. And I wish that we all did a better job. So the top of mind question is, well, if I'm fortunate enough to have that budget and I want to use it, what should I use it on? And that's kind of the point of the conversation. And we'll get into a bunch of those things with Victoria once she can join. Fabian, hi from the United States. I hope Canada is great. I miss Canada and I hope to visit again soon. Feel free to comment on your experience with learning and development in Canada, and whether you have a budget, whether you've used your budget, and how you think about your learning, both for yourself and also for people who are with you on the team. While we wait for Victoria, I did want to mention that coming up soon, there is, in my opinion, the best opportunity of the year to learn about UX research. And I will continue to plug this opportunity until it is over. And then I'll start plugging the next year. It's the UXR conference, UXR Conf, organized by the UXR Collective. It's happening the end of this month. I believe it's February 24th to 26th. 3 days of learning all about UX research. It's going to be absolutely fantastic. So I really hope you join. They've started publishing the lists of talks that are going to be there, and it's just going to be amazing. So you should check it out. Victoria,
Hello, how
how's it going?
are you?
Good, good. Welcome to this random studio thing that we have here.
Thanks. It looks a lot like my office, and I'm assuming yours, but thanks for having
Uh,
me.
Yes, yes. Welcome. It's so nice to have you. I was waiting to have a chance to talk to you for the longest time. So I really appreciate you coming today. Before you joined, I gave this intro about why we're talking about this from my perspective. The fact that there are so many ways to learn these days, and it's confusing. The fact that a lot of us have a learning and development budget, but don't use a lot of it. And so A, we should, and B, what do we use it on? And the fact that we are each in different career stages, and learning is confusing for any of those stages. It's confusing if you're trying to get into the industry and you're not sure how you should be leveling up to be prepared for that. It's
Mhm.
confusing if you're transitioning from another career. And it's confusing if you're a manager or a research leader, and there's maybe even fewer resources, or maybe there are ones that I'm not aware of, but so much to talk about. So
Yeah.
first of all, for those of you who don't know Victoria, I'll just go through a short bio and embarrass her a bit, and then we can get to questions. So Victoria is currently the director of UX research at Verizon. I am a customer. Thank you for your service. And she's leading a team of researchers there, working across a bunch of consumer business products at Verizon. Before that, she spent 6 years at Google, which is quite incredible, and worked on a bunch of teams, including Google Maps, which is one of my favorite Google products. And when I interviewed for Google, I remember this a few years ago with David, is it Huffaker? Uh, um, he was on Google Maps at the time, and we had an amazing conversation. And I still remember that to this day. So, hi, David. I imagine you're not watching this, but you're awesome. And Victoria also has it's Doctor Victoria. You have a PhD in HCI from Cornell, which is much fancier than my PhD. And you've been a speaker and an educator in a bunch of conferences and done so much. And and I started my career in the military and missile defense, and that's kind of original. You started your career as a figure skater. Is that true?
So you did dig a bit.
I did. I
Uh,
did dig a bit. I did dig a bit.
yeah, no, I was a figure skater all throughout school, college, grad school. So did that for a while.
I think that's amazing. I'm just always in awe of just and amazed by the variety of experiences that we have. I haven't been skating in forever. Actually, I'd like to. Like it's fun. It's been many years since I did that, and now I have kids, and we should. I also think that you might just be, and this is part of the reason why I wanted to talk about this topic with you, the most credentialed UX researcher and UX research manager. Like you have this list on LinkedIn of credentials, both internally from Google, but also from NNG and IBM and Coursera. And I'm probably forgetting a few. Maybe we can start a bit with, like, I guess my first question for you would be just give us a quick overview of your career and how you made your choices specifically about learning and development along your career. Why did you make those particular choices to learn that way and not some other way?
Yeah, and what's interesting too, is I think the things that you just mentioned, most of those are from the past year or so. So which I think you'll hear about why when I kind of do a little bit of telling the story. So yeah, as you mentioned, I started as more of an academic in HCI, and I think I took a pretty straightforward path into a career as a UX researcher, going really from undergrad, computer cognitive science, psychology, fine arts, PhD, HCI, internship at Google, convert there for a while, and then, you know, continue on that path. So and to be completely honest, I didn't spend a lot of time thinking about learning development when I was at Google, because there was so much internally that you could take advantage of. There was a yearly UX University event where all of the UXers internally would share things, and it was really just part of what we did. But I think as I was starting to prepare for leaving Google, that's when I became a lot more intentional about what was I doing with my time spent on learning and development, and how was I going to make sure that I didn't lose that when I went to somewhere with just a different, different set of resources, a different infrastructure, different size of teams, all that. And also along that way, another just interesting shift to call out is kind of that shift I went from being more of an academic researcher to really embracing the fact that I am now fully in industry as I hung on to Kai and those academic ACM conferences for a while, and was really active in the program committees and the conference committees until I realized that really wasn't who I was anymore, and I kind of needed to let that go to really go where I wanted to be. So that's the high level of my story, and happy to dig in anywhere.
Yeah, and I love that point. I love to keep up a certain relationship with academia, and try, when there were still in-person conferences, I try to attend, the one conference a year in my realm, which is psychology. I think that's a fascinating point, though, that part of L&D and just your growth is the fact that you evolve, your identity evolves, and you recognize that maybe it's time to focus on certain aspects of your growth and put away others, because you have to make hard choices at some point. You can't just learn everything.
And
yeah.
academia it was comfortable, right? It's the community I know, it was the people I knew, and that first other conference I went to where I didn't know anyone, it was a lot. Yeah, it was a much more of a leap, but it was 100% the right thing to do.
Yeah. Can you give us some insight into what goes on in these Google annual UX research universities you mentioned? What happens there? What sort of training do you get there?
I think it's really similar to what you'd see at an external conference. It's all Googlers who are giving, we have some keynotes that are brought in from outside, but it's the same. You'll have, design tracks, research tracks, UX engineering tracks, and just it's people sharing best practices, whether it be methods or bodies of work that they're really proud of, tools. So it really just is kind of the same thing, but just happening all internally and just really at your fingertips and without having to expense anything, or use an L&D budget. So it's but that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Because it's also then you're learning from people who are all in that same environment, have that same approach, which again, it's very helpful in applying it to what you do, but it does become a little bit of a, microcosm in a way of learning from, just people who are at your company.
Yeah. Yeah. So before you joined, I was kind of covering my personal view of the landscape of learning and development opportunities that UX researchers currently have. I'd love to hear your take on what that landscape is, how you view the current state of learning opportunities for UX researchers.
I mean, the first thing that just comes to mind is just how many there are, and I don't know if this is just an artifact of the fact that I came to looking to for external opportunities a little bit later. So really in the past few years is when I've really paid attention, but there just feel like there's more than ever, right? There's your formalized courses that have been around for a while, like the Nielsen Norman courses and, all the different boot camps. But one of my favorite sources these days is LinkedIn. And I remember thinking, years ago, how LinkedIn was the biggest waste of time. And I don't know when it became really valuable, but for me, it almost felt like overnight it became, probably because I wasn't paying attention to it. And then all of a sudden I started, and it was just, there was so much there from, from people like Amanda, who shared the UXR, who's, I think she was on one of your UX class, sharing her tips of the day, which have been awesome little tidbits to just peek in every morning. But it's actually, LinkedIn is actually turning into one of the platforms that I consume daily just to see what's out there, see what articles people are posting. And yeah, I think that's been great. And then also just say that the UXR Collective has been another one of my favorites. And that was actually the first industry conference that I really stepped out into. And really is what I think sold me on the fact that I was no longer someone who should be going to Chi every year and someone who should be going to the UXR conference every year instead. I think their platform is also just has so many insightful talks that I'm learning from all the time, and really encourage my team to take part in and to really consume that content.
Yeah. I post on LinkedIn sometimes.
I see.
And I think it's an interesting point, because I think, yes, there are many online courses and passive ways to learn, or passive-ish ways to learn. But I am also, as it seems you are, a fan of kind of the communities that have been created.
Yeah.
And I think that by actively participating in those communities, you can actually often gain more than a lecture or course. So I agree that LinkedIn has become somewhat more useful. So what is your favorite way to learn then? Or what's been, you mentioned you've taken a lot of kind of certifications courses recently. Which one was, I'm going to force you to publicly acknowledge, which one was your favorite and why? Or you don't have to mention names, but in terms of ways of learning, what's worked best for you?
I actually think the making the LinkedIn feed a part of my habit has worked the best, because it's in bite sizes, right? I can read an article when it comes up. So I lump in subscribing to newsletters in that same group, because it's still like kind of, it comes to me and then I can, take a few minutes here and there to kind of click through. And I found a lot of great content, whether it be LinkedIn or some of the newsletters I've subscribed to. And it doesn't take a full day, right? Like that's something that can be really hard to say, I'm going to dedicate several full days to conferences, at least not very often, right? It's great to set some time aside to do that, but you also don't want your learning to be a once a year thing when you're doing that conference. I think these other ways are great to kind of keep up on it just day to day. So I really do love that. I also say Coursera also functions, and I now realize that I'm answering your question with all of the above and not picking one. But I think Coursera that's another reason why that has worked well for me as well, because the courses are also, small bite-sized pieces I can do when I can, because we're all busy. I mean, I have 2 small kids who finally just went back to daycare after our, Northeaster here in, outside New York City. And time is limited. And so.
I agree. I also have 2 kids of my own. Didn't have the polar vortex, because ever since I moved from Illinois, thankfully, I don't have polar vortexes. But yeah, I love the bite-sized idea, and I'll have the chutzpah to plug here below my own newsletter.
Yes.
Because I do think that there is something almost magical about being able to just quickly consume a bit of content and to move on with your day. We are all struggling to just keep up with work and everything that's going on. So I like that.
I did subscribe, so I'm looking forward to the content that you're sharing.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, I was talking, I think before you joined, about the fact that, again, a lot of people are not even using the learning development resources they have, not to mention the budgets they have. And that's a real shame, because we could all be doing a little more learning and growth than we probably are. And you manage a team of how many people approximately these days?
12.
Yeah, so a sizable team. Do you encourage them to kind of, be learning and growing? And if so, how are you approaching that?
Yeah, it's definitely. One of the things that we did is we got anyone who was interested in getting a subscription to the UXR Collective content. We, signed them up, because again, that's one of the things I think is a huge bang for your buck. And we actually recently, within my organization, which is made up of both market and UX researchers, we rolled out a more formalized process for requesting to go to conferences and attend trainings, because we wanted to make sure that people were, it was very clear how to do it, and we weren't just relying on only the people who thought to speak up to get access to those opportunities. So we made it a lot more part of our process just to remind everyone once a quarter, sign up once a quarter, and we take a look at what people are interested in going to, look at our budget, and try to allocate it across. So that's one just really tactical, easy logistical thing, just to kind of get it into the reminder. But I think what's actually more important as a manager is to really encourage people to make the space for it, because I think that's what a lot of it comes down to, is that no one's going to say I don't want to learn, but it's often the thing that falls below the line when we have all these other priorities and objectives. So as we're doing our quarterly planning, making that a line item of, okay, what are your learning objectives? Do you plan to attend any conferences? Do you want to do, if it's not a conference, but it's broken out throughout the quarter, like how much time do we need to dedicate from your quarter to spend on learning, and really protect that time, and make sure that they believe it, right? So that they're not gonna feel that, oh, it's just lip service.
I love that, and I have to acknowledge that I don't do that right now as explicitly as you clearly do. I think we do so much quarterly planning and annual planning and tactical planning and road mapping planning, and don't necessarily set out the time explicitly for that learning. This might not be top of mind for you, so you might not know the answer, but I think people would be curious to hear about the choices that your reports make in terms of what they choose to learn. So obviously you're privy to whatever they try to expense and whatever they put in their personal learning plans. What's popular these days? Do you remember kind of what's top of mind for people?
So there have been a lot of Nielsen Norman Group trainings requested from our team, as well as UXR conference. Again, I think because I'm such a fan and really suggesting that.
Yeah.
I think to some extent, though, the Nielsen Norman ones, they are pricier. So it makes sense that if you're, you want to make the most of your L&D budget, those are good things to request for. Whereas some of the other things, such as like Coursera courses, well, I would 100% welcome seeing those submitted. We're not getting as much of that because those are a little more accessible, I think, even on their own. So that's what we see a lot of. But I'm also looking forward to seeing where the team goes next, once we've kind of tapped out a lot of those courses. Personally, I'm really looking to learn more on the business side and learn more from my market research colleagues. It's new to me to be a part of a organization that is both market and UX research, and I have a lot to learn. I've already learned a ton there. So I've been spending my Coursera time on things like business analytics and business fundamentals, and things that I think are the biggest gap in my skill set that I'm particularly realizing as I changed to a very different type of company than Google was.
I love that point. I often tell my mentees that I spend at least 5 to maybe 10% of my learning time focusing on things that are not related to UX research.
Yeah.
We work in a very collaborative environment. We work with, most of us work with PMs, with designers, with engineers, with marketers, with other insight professionals and research professionals. And to your point, I think it's incredibly important to understand their worlds as well. Not to mention, someone on the Wellfront team, Ryan, is actually writing an article right now about the importance of understanding the business aspects as a researcher. And I think it's something that a lot of us miss. So I love that.
And that's where I think we can learn. I mean, I think my team, we can learn from our market research colleagues quite a lot on that aspect.
Yeah. What goes on in these Nielsen Norman certifications? I haven't done one myself. It's one of the most well-known places to go learn about UX. They were both and still are I don't know what we call them, the like founding fathers of, or something like that. What goes down in these courses? What did you learn?
I mean, so there's a wide range of topics, right, across UX they spread across, the research track, the design track, management track. So the content varies widely, but they're all, a combination of lectures, group group work. I think one of the most valuable things that I got from them as well is resources to use later. So templates for things like journey mapping or service design blueprints, spreadsheets for thinking about how to skill map the different UX skills across a team and how you can use that to be reflective as a manager of where your team is and where maybe you want to grow. So it's a lot of toolkits, I'd say, centered around, individual topics that can then be applied to, to your own work. But it's an intensive, day or two, depending on the format you choose. But I think that the materials have been helpful for me, especially I'd say there's so much of UX that I feel like we self-teach ourselves. Even if you come through a more traditional path of design psychology, computer science, whatever it may be, there's so much you learn on the job. And I've actually seen those courses as more of, for me, taking them in the past year, it was almost more to formalize or to cement some of the things that I kind of had picked up along the way, and kind of tie them up in a nice bow with some, spreadsheet files or whatever that I can use down the line. So they're probably different to different people, but that's how I took them.
Yeah, yeah. I'm kind of hoping that a lot of those toolkits and frameworks will be, lifted out of behind paywalls and maybe shared on other platforms or maybe just more accessible platforms. I think that often we are reinventing the wheel, and we shouldn't be.
Well, here's my shameless plug. I'm giving a talk on impact tracking at the UXR conference, and I will be giving, the template that I talk about is something we'll be making accessible to, people who come and check out the talk. So, well, not completely, behind away from a paywall. It's certainly a more accessible one. I'm also happy to make that spreadsheet available. Won't have all the commentary to it, but on my LinkedIn as well to anyone who's interested. So, completely agree.
I know, I am looking forward to that, and I will certainly use it. Eventually people will be watching, some number of people will be watching this video, and they will probably be at different points of their career. And I imagine that on your team of 12 or so, you also have people who are in very different points in their career. Some are very early, maybe it's even their first job in the UX research space, whereas others are incredibly senior and maybe operating kind of across a bunch of different organizational divisions or whatnot. When you think about career stages and learning, if you were to give a little bit of guidance or advice to people based on where they're at in their career, in the context of learning, of growth, do you think about that sometimes? Do you have any specific advice for people who are early versus people who are kind of mid-career trying to get into more senior roles versus people who are at the, whatever it's called, titles kind of random, like the principal level or whatever the higher levels are at Verizon?
That's an interesting question, because I don't think of it quite that way. I think about it more as, what are your skills, where are your gaps, and what do we need to work on? Because someone who's coming to their first job from a PhD is going to need very different things than someone who's coming to their first job, with experience, but being maybe newer to research out of a boot camp. So I think about it a little bit more in that way. But I'd say that so much of my earlier learning also just happened by observation. I started at Google clueless. And the way that I learned how to be effective was by finding the people who I was seeing being effective and trying to work with them, emulate them, talk to them, ask them questions. So I really think it's almost more about, okay, you know where you are, who is something or who is someone that you identify as, your next one or two steps, and how can you learn from them? Whether it be internally in your company and actually like working together on projects. I learned a ton from David Huffaker by, he was my manager, and, learning a ton by just having a project I worked with him on and just looking at how he did things. How did he talk to stakeholders? How did he, what did he pull out insights and bring them into meetings? How did he repackage certain pieces of work for different audiences? So I just say also, well, we didn't actually talk about it earlier on. Learning by observation, it was one of my first real, free development opportunities. And regardless of what stage you're at, there is someone who can represent that next step for you. find that and leverage that person to learn everything you can.
I think it's a great point. I know that I have a career framework, and by that I mean a framework that helps me decide, what to do with my career, where to go next, and whether I'm making the right choice for me in terms of my next step, whenever that happens. And one of the pillars of my framework is the people. And I always say that the reason people is one of the pillars is because few things determine your learning and development more than the people you get to work with and learn from, to your point. And it also affects other things, like just, how much fun you have and the kind of ambiance in the team. But I absolutely agree that if you're looking for your next role, you should be looking at who's on that team, what sort of mentor they could potentially be, what they have done to indicate that they could be a great mentor to you, and how inspired are you by them, and excited to work with them. Because I just couldn't agree more that yes, there's a bunch of books and classes and podcasts, but you might just learn the most from the person, I was going to say right beside you, but not these days. So the person, the square next to you on the Zoom call.
Yep. And I mean, I would love to see this framework, by the way, because I don't have I wouldn't call it a framework, but I will say that people and the people that I now work with that's 100% why I am where I am. That's why I chose to come to Verizon, is to work with the team that I'm working with, to learn from them, and to learn just a different way of doing things, to learn about a different kind of company, a different industry. So yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Let's talk about a crisis I think we have in the UX industry, and those are my words. I think we have a few crises. One of them is opportunities for early career people trying to break into the industry, or people trying to transition into it. I happen to know that you recently hired someone who's early career, and that's awesome. And thank you for supporting early career researchers. I know you care about this as much as I do, but it's a problem. Another crisis, which is what I want to actually talk about, is, I would say, a management crisis. Being a manager, being a leader is incredibly complex. It's incredibly challenging. And it's such a rich area with so much, knowledge out there, best practices, frameworks. You can learn to be a better manager your entire career, and there will always be something you could add to your toolkit, to your knowledge. And I feel that we owe it to the people that we manage to do better and to educate ourselves. And I think all too often people are transitioning to management. And you mentioned earlier that we often put learning and development aside for other things and other projects. And so a lot of people are thrust into management. They don't have the time to learn more about it or reflect on who they want to be as a manager and what they want to do. And it ends up being a very difficult situation for ICs who feel like they don't have the support they need, the mentorship they need, the guidance they need. They are unhappy. They are transitioning every year and a half or 2 years to the next role, because few things determine your happiness in a role more so than your manager. And so I think we have a problem here. And I know that I've dedicated a lot of time to trying to become a better manager, and I'm always trying to do that. So my question to you is, first of all, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, but I'd also love to hear what you know about resources available to us as managers to learn and grow. And if you're managing managers, I'm not sure if you are or not, so please tell me, how are you helping them grow in their careers?
Yeah, no, this is a good topic. And this is where I think I probably look most outside of UX. Besides trying to up my business skills and knowledge there, because I think that part of the reason that we have management crisis is because a lot of the companies and the cultures where UX research is common. I think the wider companies have management crises. And one of the things I've actually really respected about coming to Verizon is that coming to a more traditional, well-established company, I've actually experienced a lot stronger management and leadership than I think I saw, back in, the tech industry. So, but there's more resources out there on management than there are on UX research even, right? So I think it's about doing a lot of soul searching. I think where you started, right? It's like, what do you need as an individual? Like, do you want to be a manager, right? Like, we're lucky in the fact that we're in a field that there are parallel tracks. You can continue to be an IC and be a great senior IC at many places and not have to take on management. So just that's possible, and just having that like real conversation with yourself. I have always wanted to take on a management role. It's something that I love working with others. I love working to grow people, to see potential, and to help just develop other people. And that's just first and foremost one of the things that I see as my biggest roles. So I actually struggle to point to specific things or specific things I've read, or just because I feel like it really just more comes down to, do you really want to be a manager? And why? Do you want it because you want power or this illusion of power? Or do you really want to work for your team and work to help grow them and be the one who's on the hook, right, to build a practice and to make sure that UX research is everything that it can be, for whatever scope you're managing. So I actually have to think a little bit on what are some of the best resources, because I think it's almost less that, and it's almost more just being honest about yourself and where are your own personal weaknesses. And for me, it's like, I need to meditate on certain things, and that has nothing to do with management, but it's helping me keep myself more centered and calm so I can do it for my team, because it's critical in my role as a manager that I can do that. So yeah, kind of skewing the direct question, but a couple thoughts.
No, that makes sense to me. I do wonder, you mentioned the difference in, or at least the perceived difference in management practices and abilities between tech and where you're at now. How do you define, like, what space where would you put Verizon?
I'd say the leaders, I think the leaders at Verizon are they're stronger people managers.
No, sure. I think I meant when comparing tech to Verizon, which bucket does Verizon fall into? Is it like telecommunications, or what's what's the?
Yeah, so telecommunications, but it definitely has a shifting identity. But when I'm saying tech, I'm talking more about like your Google, Apple, Netflix, that So yeah.
Because what I was wondering is, if there are incredible people leaders and managers at Verizon, what I find myself asking myself is, why is that, right? What did they do? Because I do something very similar to what you mentioned, where I look at people who are one or two steps ahead of me, so to speak, and I try to understand, what did they do? What can I take from that? I'm not going to imitate them and copy, their career moves, but I believe I can learn something from them that could benefit me as well. And so I'm kind of wondering, thinking of the people who are at Verizon, what did they do, or what is it about that industry that led to the fact that you have better people managers and better leadership?
And this is pure conjecture. Like I don't fully know, but it feels more intentional. I think it's what you called out earlier, right? About people being just thrust in, people who are good at doing something, and then companies. You see massive growth in these tech companies, which leads to needing managers really quickly, and people getting thrust into that. And I feel like it was more intentional. And a lot of people around me now are very intentional leaders and managers in a way that maybe wasn't always the case, or I didn't always see to be the case in some of the what you consider a standard tech company.
Yeah. We are almost out of time. Time flies when you have these conversations, and I'm so glad that we did. I want to ask you one more question.
Okay.
in my opinion, to teach is to learn. And one of my favorite things to do, one of the reasons why I create content, why I write these days and do a bunch of things, is because I find that I learn so much from that, because it forces me to reflect on my practice, evaluate my practice, organize a bunch of different thoughts and inspirations from different places. It's so, so helpful. So I wonder if you see it that way as well. And I wonder how you think about, giving people on your team or future teams the opportunities, not just to learn, but to teach, and how much you're encouraging that side of things. Really curious to hear your answer to that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you went there, because I completely agree. And I think one of the things that, in the same time that I made this kind of shift from academic to more industry, and also thinking about leaving Google, like I kind of started to put myself out there more, right? And starting to speak more at these conferences, engage in the communities, get opportunities like, coming and chatting with you for a bit. So definitely completely agree there. And I think we try to do it, I try to do it a couple ways for my team. I mean, one is just our team meetings are intentionally about learning from each other. We work, we're 12 researchers that work across the entirety of Verizon, which is massive, right? So we're not working on the same things almost ever, but we are all facing similar issues. We are all are able to bring things to the table. So I encourage my team members to basically, we have open sign-up slots where people just bring things to the table, a tool, a skill that they either want to talk about or they want someone else to talk about. If they don't know who can talk about it, just say, I'm interested in learning this. Can you bring someone else in? But so constantly just giving just internal opportunities to learn and teach through learning. To your question, but also super supportive of anyone on our team going out and doing this themselves. Whether it be on LinkedIn, whether it be giving conference presentations, and happy to talk through and give feedback and support of that. I also think, again, with to your point earlier about managing managers, they're in that role where, yes, I'm trying to help them grow as managers, but also that's their opportunity to learn through their own teaching of their team members. So I think there's just so many opportunities to do that, both formally, but also through more informal structures like team meetings and informal mentorships. We give everyone who joins the team a buddy. Whether or not
That's
it
great.
lasts, what that looks like, it's totally up to them, because we don't want to force some sort of formalized mentorship program that's not going to work out. But there's a lot of opportunities to teach and learn formally and informally, depending on what people are up for, because people's appetites are different, people's bandwidths are different, and we want to respect that as well. So
that's great. And hi, Casey, thanks for joining. So we have to end, sadly, because I feel like we could talk forever, and you're always invited on this random show again if you'd like to join, as are any members of your team. We can do a group thing next time. Is there any other last piece of advice or any plug or anything else you want to share before we have to end? And also, if you're open to people reaching out to you, how can they do that at this point?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I'll say is just make the time for learning, right? Maybe not every quarter, maybe not every week, maybe it's even, certain months are better than others, and that's okay, especially these days. I know, we're overloaded, overburdened, stressed out, overworked, very many of those words. But at some point, make it an intentional part of what you do, because otherwise it's going to fall below the line. So I think that's really what I'll say. And yeah, very happy to have conversations with people. I'd say LinkedIn is the best way to find me. I'm pretty responsive to messages, comments. So feel free to find me there and reach out. I'd love to chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much. As a reminder, Victoria is the Director of UX Research at Verizon, which you've probably heard of if you have a phone. And we talked about learning and development, which, again, to Victoria's point, is so crucial. Take the time intentionally, whether you're an IC or manager, to grow, to learn. Use the budgets that many of us are privileged to have. Talk to your manager about this. make a plan, find out the best way to learn for you. It might be more passive, it might be more active, it might be a particular community. Whatever works for you, just do it. And I completely agree with Victoria on this point. Please, again, join, get your ticket right now to UXR Conf 2021, happening the end of February. It is the best UX research conference of the year. Victoria will be speaking. I have been a speaker. I am not doing that this year, thankfully. It's hard.
It
It's
is.
hard. It's so
it's
hard.
because of how much time they put into producing great content. So
it's so hard. It's amazing, amazing content. It's going to be awesome. So keep learning, keep growing. Thank you, Victoria. Have a lovely day, everyone. And see you next time.
Great.
Goodbye
Bye.
for now.